This morning, I wanted to begin with a question. This morning. What are you putting your faith in? What are you putting your faith in? A nice, easy, light question for the Sunday morning. What are you relying on? To be seen, to be known, to be secure? What are you putting your faith in? I think that when we come to this spot, when we come to these places and spaces, we can kind of know the correct answer to that. We kind of know what we ought to be putting our faith in. We kind of know what we should be putting our faith in and day out. But the realities of life can crowd in on us. That as we leave this spot, when we leave these spaces, when we leave these sacred spots, we can be surrounded by the realities of this life. And those realities can crowd in on our convictions. You see, our culture is the most self-reliant, self-promoting, self-centered culture that there's ever been in the history of mankind. We are obsessed with self, taking care of ourselves, promoting ourselves. Our world is surrounded by self. The mantra of no one else is going to take care of you, you better take care of it yourself, is something we feel in the heartbeat of the world today. That is so counter to the self-giving love of discipleship. See, if we are in this room and we would say that we are Christian, I want you to take that title very seriously. If we say we are Christian, if we say in our heart of hearts, I am a Christian man, I'm a Christian woman, I'm a Christian child, if we say that, what we're saying is that we are Christ-ian. We are Christ-like. We're aiming to be Christ-like, and we are dedicating our lives to discipleship, to the act of trying to become more like Christ day in and day out in big and small ways. We are Christian. We are called to this way of self-giving love, to a radical self-giving love. This morning, we're going to read a story in the Gospel of John, which richly displays the reality of Christ. As I was considering what I wanted to speak on this morning, I couldn't help but start pointing our hearts towards the Easter narrative, towards the glory of Easter Sunday. As we go towards that in the liturgical calendar, can our hearts start getting us more and more prepared for that? Next week will be Palm Sunday, and then Good Friday will be that Friday. But this morning, we're going to look at a story that displays the reality of Christ, as it's right before Palm Sunday. And what I want us to get is how the people respond to that reality being displayed. In particular, I want us to consider the two followers that we will see in this story this morning and how they respond and how their response reflects certain mindsets that we can find ourselves in. One is a mindset that is so aligned with our culture, and one is radically different. So we read our text this morning. I want to invite you to consider where you might be on this spectrum of faith that we see displayed. Our text this morning is going to be John 12, verses 1 through 8. The text will be on the screen, or it's going to be page 1531. I got there. It's okay. 1531 to 1532 on the Bibles in front of you. It says here, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. The text that we read this morning is placed at the turning point in John's gospel. It's placed right in the middle of John's gospel. You see, everything before this text is what we would call the book of signs. The first half of John's gospel is totally focused on the book of signs. Signs is what John says, the word he uses for the miracles. So this first half of the Gospel of John is all focused on Jesus' miracles in his earthly ministry. It's all about the signs he performed, the ways that he taught those around him, the ways that he leaned in close to the hurting, the marginalized, and those that needed help. It's all about Jesus' earthly ministry. A ministry focused on love, a ministry focused on immanence, a closeness. It's the first half of John's gospel. Right after this marks the turning point from Jesus' earthly ministry to the book of glory. John 12 through 21 is called the book of glory because it's all focused on Holy Week, on the cross, on the ultimate glory of Jesus pouring out his life for you and for me. It is all focused on the reality of the cross. The final teachings, the final words Jesus says is the second half of John's gospel. Right before this text, John lets us know that the Pharisees have decided the only way we can deal with this Jesus figure, the only way that we're going to be able to deal with him in the future is if we arrest him. The die has been cast. They are not going back. It is firmly decided that Jesus will be arrested and eventually killed. Right after this text is Palm Sunday. It's when Jesus goes to the city of Jerusalem, to the city of God, to return as a king. Jesus is fully displayed in this text. The realities of who Christ is fully displayed in this short couple of verses. We see so much of who Jesus is in this text. I love that the way that this text so beautifully displays the reality of Christ. He is surrounded by those he loves and who love him. Lazarus, who was dead, is eating with him. His family is around him, giving him a feast because their brother that was dead is brought back to life. He's surrounded by love and grace, but he's also got his eye to the cross. He's looking to where he will ultimately lay down his life. A lot of the scriptures that have this text say that Jesus is anointed in this spot. This idea of kings of old that would be anointed with oil, that would be anointed with an expensive piece of perfume or oil over their heads so that they could be set apart. That this isn't just an ordinary man, that this isn't just any old person, this is a king. And we know as Christians that this isn't just any old king, this is a king of kings and Lord of lords. But what's unique about this is that he's not anointed like most kings. In fact, he is anointed with perfume. This is a common practice in the ancient world before you buried your dead. You would cover them with perfume and spices so that the smell of rot wouldn't seep into your community. So we see this image of Jesus anointed as a king, prepared to die. It's a unique spot. It shows so much about who Jesus is. Ultimate power about to be laid low in love for you and for me. But what I wanted us to key in on is as Jesus is displaying who he is, as he's revealing even more what he's about to do, we see two specific responses. We see the example of Mary and of Judas. See, they are called to respond to this part of the narrative. They are playing a role in this narrative. And in these examples, we can see the clashing of two mindsets. The clashing of the mindset of abundance in Mary and in the mindset of scarcity for Judas. This story is in all four Gospels. It's in all four Gospels. The Gospel writers, for some reason, they dedicated that the Gospel account of who Jesus is was not complete without this story in particular. That's something we have to wrestle with. This is something we got to acknowledge. In fact, in Matthew, Jesus says, wherever the gospel is told, this woman's story will be told too. There's something special about this. There's something unique about this story. I think it reveals how we might respond to the reality of Jesus. But it's only in John where he actually signals that Judas is the one that objects to Mary. He's the only one that calls out Judas as the one that has an objection to what Mary does. And if you read the text, you kind of see that John's trying to stack the deck as much as he can, even if this is your first time reading it, that you want to align with what Mary's doing, right? It says that one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. It says that he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. We should not, intuitively, we know which side that we want to be on. What I want us to catch, sometimes in the Gospels and in the biblical text, we'll see these two contrasting ideas. And John does this really well, of having two radically different ideas, two different mindsets that we can be on, that we can find ourselves in. And what I think can happen is that we say, well, I'm not as bad as Judas, so I'm not that bad, right? Or I think I'm a little bit closer to Mary. But here's the reality. Very rarely are people living in the binary of 100% good, 100% bad. 100% an abundance mindset and 100% a scarcity mindset. We're usually somewhere in between. And if we're honest, sometimes we can kind of be on this better side some days and sometimes on the worst side on some other days. What I want you to consider is where you might be at this morning on this spectrum and how you might push yourself from a scarcity mindset towards an abundance mindset. The mindset of abundance says that I have more than enough, and that what I have cannot be taken away from me. It is the mindset of the disciples. It's the mindset of our early martyrs of the faith. It's the mindset of those that you know that are perfectly content to be where they're at. It's a beautiful mindset. This idea that there is plenty for everyone, and if I give freely, then I will still have more to give. The scarcity mindset is the exact opposite. It says there's only so many resources in this world. There's only so much to go around. There's only so much even good to go around. And the only way for me to get more is if you get less. There's not enough to go around. No one's going to take care of you but you. You gotta make sure you take care of yourself first and foremost. And if you have a little bit left over, then you can kind of take care of other people if you want to. There's 4 main points that we see of these two mindsets from our characters. We'll walk through them this morning. The first is that Mary gives radically. She gives radically, ridiculously. You see, this pint of nard that we see in verse 3 was an ancient equivalent of a rainy day fund. Essentially, what this is Mary wasn't just having all this expensive perfume, and she wasn't having all these, necklaces and bracelets. She wasn't all rizzed out. That's probably a youthful term, I think. I spend too much time with the kids, I think. She didn't have that much, but this idea is that in the ancient world, you would save up your extra. You save up until you could buy something valuable, and preferably something small that you could keep on your person so you always knew where it was, so it would never be lost. And if something did happen to you, something made it so you couldn't work, or natural disaster beset you, you would have a year's worth of an emergency fund. You'd have about a year to be able to figure out how you'd work, how you'd gain, how you'd be able to live your life. It's a costly thing that she gives. It represented her security. I love that she pours it on the feet of Jesus, because Jesus, to her, is her security. It's radical. It's beautiful. She gives it away freely. Jesus doesn't prompt it. He doesn't say anything, but she gives it away because of her love for him and her courage and knowledge that God will have her. If Mary gives radically, Judas grasps frantically. Mary gives freely what is hers to give, and a costly thing to give. Judas grasps what isn't his. He's trying to gather as much for himself as he can. He got even to the point where he is stealing from the poor. You gotta understand that Jesus' followers weren't going home to their families. They didn't have money of their own. They were fully dependent on the generosity of others. So I gotta imagine there's a part of Judas that's like, I don't know how long Jesus is gonna be around. I don't know how long we can keep this up. I don't know how long we can hope that people are gonna feed us. So what if I just pocket a couple dollars here and there? We're still helping the poor, but if I am able to take care of myself, it's probably better. Scarcity mindset says that my good can only come from the expense of others. No one's going to take care of you but you. So quickly we can find ourselves with this mindset doing things we never thought we'd do. Taking from others in horrible ways because we got to take care of ourselves. Our second point, or second contrasting ideas, is that Mary serves extravagantly. The way that she serves Jesus is extravagant. In Jesus' day, people would wash their feet as they would walk into the door. This is done pragmatically just because you kick up dust, and most people wore sandals. but it was usually done only from the humble servants or the lowliest of the folks. But Mary's not washing his feet with water, but with perfume. This is a radical act of service, far beyond what would be expected. Some commentaries I read, they said like some of the most lavish kings could imagine being washed with perfume, taking a bath in perfume. And we see this picture of Jesus getting washed with perfume. And I think there's this call of us to serve extravagantly, to do wild things that don't make sense, to lay down our lives so much that people look around and are like, man, are you okay? Like, honestly, are you okay? But that's our call. Serving extravagantly. This costly gift allows for extravagant service. Where Mary serves, Judas desires recognition. He wants to be seen. He takes such a care to point out the flaws of others. He does such a show in verse 5 where he's like, man, what couldn't this be used for better uses? Couldn't this be used for the poor? Think of the poor people out there that are starving. Couldn't this be used for better? Makes such a show. And we even know in the text that he's not even going to do it. That's not even his intention. He doesn't care about the poor. He just wants Mary to be seen as lower. Here's the tricky thing with the scarcity mindset. Just like finances, we could say, man, if I take from another, that's just better for me. It too has this idea for recognition, for pride, for exaltation. If I can be made higher, I can be seen as better if I make everyone else seem lower. If I make everyone else around me seem lower than me, if I start gossiping about my fellow workers to my boss, like, oh man, I was here cracking on, but so-and-so came in at lunch. Have you noticed how long that person takes for his lunch break or this or that? We can find ourselves so often, so quickly, wanting to make ourselves look better, or if we're honest, maybe even feel better about ourselves when we make others lower. Friends, for the church, can it not be so? Can it not be so for us? Mary is active and vulnerable. She is participating in God's story to the point where she is recognized and she's remembered. Jesus himself says that her story will not be excluded from the gospel account. That wherever this story is taught or preached, that this story would be included. She is forever venerized, remembered for being active. She places herself in a vulnerable position, and we even see the criticism that she receives. Here is the thing I want us to kind of catch to. What she does isn't perfect. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's gorgeous, it's glorifying, but it's not perfect. Here's the thing. I think John puts so much emphasis on Judas being the one that opposes. Of him even saying like, oh, his reasons aren't even that good. He was a thief. He wasn't even going to do. Because if he didn't put that in, if we're honest, we kind of be like, I don't know, that's a year's worth of money? It could be used for better, right? It could actually be used to help some poor people. It's someone eating for a full year. That could actually do some impact. But what I want us to catch is that this isn't perfect, but it's still glorified. It's still honored. So often I think some of us, and myself included, will keep ourselves back from doing good works. Or keep ourselves back from praying for people. We'll keep ourselves back from investigating how people are doing in a deeper sense. We'll keep ourselves back from sharing the Word of God. We'll keep ourselves back from discipling or mentoring those that are younger than us because we're like, well, Brad, I'm not that perfect. Or the way that I would teach isn't really perfect. Or the way that I would mentor isn't going to be perfect. Or the way that I would even give these resources aren't perfect. The way I could give my time isn't perfect. Friends, what our text shows is that God honors and blesses what isn't perfect for his glory and his good. He takes our little gifts, he takes our little handmade macaroni portraits and he makes them into the Mona Lisa. He makes our little gifts glorious. Where Mary is active and vulnerable, Judas is passive and safe. Judas is just talking, imagining something that could be used as better. And we even know he's not going to follow through, even if he could. I watch a lot of football, and I tell you what, it is so easy to make the right call after the play is done. You should always go for it on fourth down. Always go for it on fourth down. Always go on it on fourth down. Statistically, all that stuff. But if my team doesn't make it on fourth down, you never go on it for fourth down. Always kick it. Come on. A lot of game left to play. There's something about our culture, there's something about the day and age that we live in where we are surrounded by spectators, consumeristic spectator culture, and it can bleed so quickly into our faith, where we can watch others serve, we can watch others give their lives away, we can watch others preach the gospel, we can watch others evangelize. Friends, I just am convicted by this reality, even in my life. When I'm passive and safe, my faith is dry. It's weak, and it's boring. If all I'm focused on is how I can gain, I have a weak, boring faith. But if I am in the trenches, if I seek ways to serve, if I push myself, it's alive. It's active. My final point for these two ideas is that Mary's faith spreads. I love this line in verse 3 where it says, and the house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. I want you to consider sometime when you were in a space that was filled with a fragrance, that was filled with a smell that you couldn't escape, a smell that would burrow deep into your skull. I'm guessing it's probably not a pleasant smell. But I want you to consider when you're in a spot where smell is surrounding you, it can be hard to escape. There's something sacred with smell. There's something sacred with this. And what I love about this is that the faith of Mary cannot be ignored by everyone in the room. Everyone sees it. Everyone, the smell burrows into their skulls. They can't ignore what she's done. And you know what's cool? It spreads onto them. That smell spreads onto them. And then as they go, someone could be like, oh man, you smell like nard. That smells really like. And they get to say what happened. And they get to spread this glorious action, this one act of faith is spread throughout. Friends, I believe you and I are called to be smelly Christians. I think that we are. I think we're called to be smelly. I think we're called to be fragrant. I think that the way that we live our lives, the way that we serve, the way that we go out into this world, people should take notice. Say there's something different with you. And let that love spread more and more and more. Where Mary's faith spreads, Judas's allegiance shifts. He shifts sides. We know this. If we've grown up in the church, if you haven't, spoiler, Judas switched sides. We know this. But I think a lot of it has to do with his mindset. He wants to be on the winning team. And he will abandon his convictions to do so. Judas would rather be seen as doing good than doing the hard, costly work of discipleship. And I just see this so often, even in my life of, like, if I don't have skin in the game, if I'm not active, if I'm not doing the work of ministry, it can be so easy for me to fade out, in and out of faith when I want to. When we don't have skin in the game, it can be so easy just to be swept up to what seems good at the time. I don't know about you, but I am convicted by the ways I can find myself in a scarcity mindset, and I so desperately want to align my heart with Mary, to live into this abundance mindset, and I believe that Mary gives us 3 key movements to live this out. To live out an abundant mindset, we need 3 main things. The first is that we see that we need to be close to Christ. Mary was radically close to Jesus. Radically close. She pours out the pint of nard and then wipes his feet with her hair. Like, she is radically close to the person of Jesus. And I believe that while we can't be physically close to Jesus, we ought to be spiritually close to Jesus. Friends, this is our first step. We need to get close to Christ. It is a crisis that you need to take seriously. Take your spiritual development seriously. Because we need to be filled up. We need to feel his presence. We need to do what works. If you are sitting here in this room and you are struggling to open your Bible, if you're struggling to be in his word, if you're struggling to have prayer be a consistent thing, if you're struggling to have silence be fruitful in your life, if you're struggling to find a community to talk through the word together, if you're struggling for spaces to mentor others that are younger behind you, friends, please reach out to me, to Craig, to all of our elders. We get a lot of calls for people reaching out for help for physical needs. And man, we love to bless those folks. But I know in a room like this, there's so many more people that are just struggling with their faith. That are struggling to know how to read their word. That are struggling to say, like, man, I have read my word and it just feels dull. And I feel stretched thin. Man, I encourage you to take that step of faith. To lean in close to those at this church that want to serve and honor you. It's serious business, because when we are close, we're able to know our value. You got to know your value, and I think we can only know that if we're close to Christ. Mary knows the value of the nard. She doesn't get all surprised when Judas is like, that was worth a year's wages. She's not like, oh, shoot. That was a year? You said, oh, dang, can we get some of this back in the jar maybe? No? No, she knew. She knew what she was giving. And what I fear so often is that we don't know what we could be giving. Like, do you know who you are? Like, biblically, do you know who you are? We have a wonderful theology of life when it comes to our little ones and our little babies. But then we're like, well, but me, I'm just like, whatever. I'm like an ordinary person. God doesn't make ordinary. He's not in the business of cookie cutter, any old thing kind of people. He makes masterpieces. He has gifted you specifically. He has equipped you with talents and gifts and purpose, and he's gifted you with the context, with a specific people that are surrounded by you. Do you know your value, your dignity, your worth, that you are an image bearer of the King? You are Imago Dei. That when God created all things, he said it was good, but when he created mankind, he said, this is very good. This looks like me. He didn't just say that to Adam and then was like, well, this person over here, I don't know. He's fine. Man. Firmly believe the enemy would love to trap you in self-doubt and ordinary. To make you believe that you can have a large impact on someone because you aren't perfect or the way that you would approach someone isn't perfect. Here's the reality. Jesus just used 12 quote-unquote ordinary guys to change the world. Most of them were fishermen. Do you know what fishermen were back in the day? They were the guys that flunked out of school. Like, as they're growing up in school, like the teachers would be like, oh man, you know what, this Peter guy, he ain't going nowhere. Just, you know what, you go find the trade of your dad. You can help get some fishing, but he ain't doing much. That's the people that change the world. Half a world away, these 12 knuckleheads were faithful. They took this seriously. They knew who they were. Because of that, you and I are sitting in this room. I can't help it, but I just look at this room and I'm like, man, there's more than 12 people here. I'm at least good enough at that math. Man, do you get excited about that? Man, could you imagine what could happen to our city, to our county, to our area? Like, if we took this seriously, that people could come in and say, like, man, there's something different about Salina. There's something different. If we took this seriously, man, don't fall into the trap of ordinary. Finally, Mary lives radically sacrificially. She lives sacrificially to a radical extent. We would look at her and be like, man, maybe that's a little too far. Man, I think that's what we're called to. Band, you can start coming up. Can we eagerly seek to pour out our lives in more and more radical ways? Can we look at where we can be formed so that we are able to know who we are and pour out to others? Man, what a fun way to live. What a fun game to play with our lives, to say like, man, I want to know how I can even more radically serve others. Give my life away more and more and more and more, because I know that I will forever be filled up. This list was intentional. It's done in order. We can't give our lives away unless we know that we're always going to be filled up. Man, don't rob others of the gift of you because you don't take seriously your spiritual formation. Know your value and give it away freely as you live towards abundance. Where are you in this spectrum this morning? Where do you want to be? Can you and I take this call seriously? Begin turning away from a scarcity mindset and living in abundance, like we see in Mary. Thank you.